This is Impact Healthcare, people and strategies that are disrupting the health benefits industry. And now, here's your host, healthcare benefits industry expert and the originator of the transparent health benefits movement, Lester Morales.
Welcome back to another episode of Impact Healthcare Podcast. I've got somebody who I think drinks the, hey, I just love talking about how broken the system is Kool-Aid as much as I do. Ray Kober, who is the CEO of Benefixa. Ray, for people who maybe on my audience has never met you or your great company, give us an introduction.
Well, thank you, Lester. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I eat, live, sleep, breathe, drink this stuff. So, with a lot of people, I think, kind of probably puts them to sleep at night is actually exciting for me. And I guess the easiest way to describe Benefixa is we're an organization that puts people first. If you look at our logo, there's like a little icon of a guy raising his hands, guy, gal. Exactly. And the whole idea or concept that I had when creating the logo was that icon not only represents the employer, but it also represents the employees. And I think a lot of people miss that. It can't all be about driving revenue to the bottom line. It can't all be about delivering the best benefits in the world. There's got to be kind of a happy medium. And I think the concept of Benefixa is to have conversations with decision makers in the business of healthcare to see where they want to steer their ship, where they want to go, where they are now, and how to best achieve their goals. And I love what I do because there's no two organizations that are exactly the same. So we have fun with it.
So, Ray, I kind of always think that guys and gals that wake up, what I'm going to call being a salmon, right? Swimming upstream, doing it the harder way, really putting that member, that employee first. There's usually a why. There's a story. There's a that's my true north. That's my North Star, my guiding principle. You got anything that triggers you every day?
Yes. So I'm a product of, I was born, I'm going to date myself, but I was born in the mid 60s, grew up in the 70s and 80s. In the 70s, I was on a group text with my cousins the other day, and I was like, sorry for the kids on this chat, but the 1970s was the best decade to be alive. And that's just my own personal bias and opinion. But one of the things that came out of the 70s, Star Wars, I was like 12 years old when Star Wars came out. Rocky is my favorite picture of all time. And Rocky is a love story. People may be not familiar with films or, that I think that's missed often, but Rocky is really a love story. But what resonates with me about Rocky is you have a guy who's just the ultimate underdog, and he figures out a way against all odds to compete. He doesn't win the fight, but he competes with the world champion. And so that is something that has always stuck with me. It's just part of my soul. And I can't stand it when I see the system, in this case, take advantage of the little guy. And it's just, the more I learn about our business and how dirty, how filthy it is, the more I think inspired and amped I get to go out there and help organizations really kind of see the light, which is you don't have to do it this way anymore. We could actually set the stage to have you win as an organization and have your employees win this crazy game of healthcare.
Awesome. I was not born in the 60s. I was born in the 70s, and I do love Rocky. I think the Russian one is my favorite, though.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know why. I think it's the the revenge, right? Like he was doing it for Apollo, part of it. But so when we were chit-chatting in the beginning, you mentioned a word. It's probably in my top 5 words. Obviously impact is my number 1 word, since that's, the slogan and the name of the company and the name of the podcast. But you said authenticity, and I feel that our entire business is the opposite of that, right? And I don't want to get this podcast sued for any reasons, but when we think about it, like the major brands in this business, whether we're talking on any side of the business, portray themselves as the hero and like that we're here to fix and we're here to, help. And although I don't think anything was designed to purposefully, screw somebody, I do think that the business is built in such a way that maybe being that hero and being that, knight in shining armor isn't able to be done. When you think of the word authenticity and you think of health insurance, why is it so important to you? And what are the types of conversations that then you use in that authentic moment for you to educate an employer about it's probably not what you think it really is?
Yeah, it's a great question. Authenticity for me is really simple. Let's not overcomplicate it. It's do what you say you're going to do, right? I'm a Jets fan, but Bill Belichick's got it right when he says do your job, right? So it's really no more complicated than that. Just show up and be prepared to back up your statements. Be prepared to do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. Be on time, be timely, be a professional, do your job and get it done. I think we're in a business where brokers tend to focus too much on revenue. And let's be fair, the majority of the brokers out there are not the decision makers. They are employees of a larger organization. And they're doing what they're being told and directed to do. And so it's in the business model of brokers to generate income, to generate revenue. And I know we're going to talk about the documentary that we are co-producers on. And I have to give credit to you, Lester, because one of my absolute favorite lines in the documentary was stated by you. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the line is, nobody wakes up in the morning saying they want less revenue, right? It's just so true. And that's the reality in our business. And I think, in that vein or spirit of things, I have, I call them shiny objects. Brokers are always pushing or peddling the next shiny object because there are so many different ways to drive revenue and profit in this business. And look, let's not fault brokers for generating revenue and for wanting to drive revenue. That after all is the name of the game. But I have an issue, and I take issue with revenue for the sake of revenue without something behind it, without addressing the greater good. And I think that's where most brokers kind of go off the tracks. And the greatest example of that is just, being the sales arm of the large insurance carriers and, perpetuating the healthcare's big lie, which is you can't do anything to change the cost of healthcare.
So someone just heard that statement, and I want to combine the 2 statements into one. Healthcare's biggest lie: you cannot do anything to change the cost of healthcare. So I'm an employer. I just said, yeah, you can't, right? Like I have budgeted double-digit rate increases, and it is just like anything else. The cost is going to go up every single year. What is your rebuttal, and how do you start that conversation?
What you're talking about is buying into the status quo. If you throw your hands up and you say there's nothing that can be done, guess what? Nothing can be done. You just have to resign yourself to pay more every year and budget for that. The trouble is, if you know the math, and I know the math, it's unsustainable at some point, unless you're a tech giant, a super, giant organization that's got revenue that's just oozing from everywhere. Then, yeah, maybe you don't care about your healthcare bill. It's budget dust. But for most organizations out there, it's the number one expense after payroll. And most organizations have no clue how to address this cost. And these same organizations, though, will negotiate the cost of a paperclip down to 0.0001 cents, right? But when it comes to, I don't know, maybe shopping for the quality of a cardiac procedure for a key employee, they just rely on their health insurance carrier to figure that out. And we know, Lester, you and I know that it's counterintuitive, but in healthcare, there's an inverse value proposition, right? The cost is not necessarily, if you're paying the most, you're not necessarily getting the best care. It's quite often the opposite, where the lowest cost for care is actually the highest quality. And the answer, or the reason for that, is frequency and volume. The surgeons, the surgical centers that are set up to do these procedures, and they do the same thing over and over and over every day. They're going to get better. They're going to have more precision. They're going to have less complications, and the costs therefore are lower. So when you think about it, and I'm sure there are going to be employers tuning into this, CFOs, CEOs, COOs, people that are responsible. They have P&L responsibility. I ask you, like, in your organization, do you manage your expenses? What does your SG&A account look like? And if healthcare is up there, if it's one of those top expenses, what are you doing to manage it? And if the answer is it can't be managed, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're just mistaken there.
So, Ray, let's unpack that. And obviously, the number of tools in the toolbox are plentiful that most people don't know, but let's pick two and dig into that and say, okay, hey, you piqued my interest. I'm a business owner. I have not met one that has not said that healthcare is a troubling expense. And then I'm also going to throw you another bone that says, even if the employer doesn't care, there's not many employees that love the fact that they have $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 of out-of-pocket expense themselves. So pick one of your favorite talk tracks that you like, that you're like, man, every employer needs to be looking at this. What's your number one that comes to your mind?
Pharmacy is the low-hanging fruit. We all know that. People who run in the same circles as you and I know that. It's the easiest to wrap your head around. And it's the easiest to give like, why is Mark Cuban getting involved in the pharmacy business? There's a lot of money in it. Yeah, I'm sure he's very charitable, but there's a reason for it. Why does a company like CVS buy Aetna? How does that happen? How does a PBM buy a health insurance company? And that usually gets people thinking, because I know when I heard it, I was just like, what happened? Right? That doesn't make sense. That's how much, can I curse on your podcast? That's how much fucking money is in drugs. Drugs is a big business. So when you think about it, if you have all of the major insurance carriers, and you could do a Google search or ChatGPT or AI your heart out, just ask, why do major insurance carriers also own PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers? And the answer is money. It is a tremendous, tremendous source of revenue for these organizations. OptumRx is the biggest profit center for United Healthcare, and United Healthcare is a really, really big company. And that's not to pick on them. It's just one of the majors, right? One of the bucas. But if you think about it, and you let's say that it doesn't matter what size organization you are, because you and I have both seen large and even enterprise organizations that are still fully insured. It's hard to believe, but there are a few that are out there. And what does it mean? It means that they have absolutely zero control to manage the cost of healthcare. They're relying on the insurance carrier to do all of it for them. And just ask yourself, as a business professional, if that is the locomotive, if that's the engine that your caboose is hooked up to, do you think it's going to take you where your costs are the lowest or where their revenue is the highest? It's not too complicated.
So right, theoretically, I think, okay, and now, I mean, that was a major Wall Street Journal article this morning, I believe, was I got texted. It's funny, I'm finally teaching my friends, all of this, and then they'll send me random articles that they read somewhere, and they're like, so this is what you do? I'm like, so in the Wall Street Journal today, pharmacy benefit managers increase drug costs, FTC says, Wall Street Journal. And so let's dig a little bit more. This is your domain. I am an employer. I'm, a couple hundred employees. I'm looking at this and says, okay, he said Optum. That's on my card. I saw them card. Optum is my pharmacy, so they kind of decide, where my drugs are, and like, is it a generic or a brand or a specialty, all that. But right, if United Healthcare owns Optum, don't they both want to lower the cost of healthcare? Because like that's the insurance company, like they want to keep costs down low. Wouldn't that be a rational thought?
Yeah, that's what most people think, right? You think that the lower claims are, the better the insurance carrier does. But in fact, insurance is heavily regulated. And one of the regulations that we have that really, in my opinion, we could talk about this if you'd like, Lester, is the MLR, the medical loss ratio, that was baked into the Affordable Care Act when it was passed. And the medical loss ratio says that the more money an insurance carrier bills, the more money it gets to keep for revenue and overhead, right, expenses. So now that's not the story, though. That's not the narrative that was pushed to get the MLR through, because anyone would say that's crazy, right? That's really what's happening. But the narrative that was pushed is, well, insurance carriers have an obligation to spend as much money as possible for any money that they take in claims. So 80 cents on the dollar for a small employer, less than 100 in most parts of the country, and 85 cents on the dollar, every dollar that they take in, should be dispersed in claims. And as a logical thinking person, you say, well, that makes sense, right? That's the majority of the dollar should be going to claims, until you hear the other side of the story, which I said first, which is, but they also get to keep 15 to 20 cents of that dollar for administrative overhead and profit. So what has to happen, Lester, for the CEO of United Health Group to fulfill his fiduciary obligation to his shareholders?
The way I say it, if you capped my ability to make more dollars because I've managed claims better, how do I make more money? I charge more dollars. It's arithmetic.
It's a racket.
In another great word, yes.
It is a racket. And so the reality is, insurance carriers have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders, to the people that invest in their business. Their obligation is to grow the business, generate more revenue. And we have a system where the federal law, the ACA, Obamacare, the law of the land, says that the more money an insurance carrier bills, the more revenue it generates. So what does that mean moving forward? What will our healthcare bill expense look like in 2025 versus 2024? It's not rocket science, right? It's pretty straightforward.
Right. So we were digging in. All right. Now we understand Optum. We were playing with United just as an example. major insurance company owns major PBM, or in some cases, major PBM owns insurance company. We were talking about the lowest hanging fruit is drugs. We were also saying that we kind of don't know, and maybe this is where we could dig into, how does a PBM make money? Like how I used to joke that most clients think it's like the old Prego commercial. It's just in there. And I think that's the reality, but like, let's unpack that. How does a pharmacy benefit manager get paid?
Okay, so I'll give you a very, very, very simplistic example. So there's retail and there's wholesale. Let's just use that. I know there are plenty of other layers, distribution and blah, blah, blah. Retail and wholesale. So you, Lester, are United Health Group, United Healthcare, and I am OptumRx. And Johnny over here is patient number one. He's an employee of XYZ organization. And so what I'm going to do as the OptumRx superstar is I'm going to go to you, Lester, and I'm going to say, oh, actually, I'm not going to you. I'm going to the manufacturer of the drug. So there's a fourth party in this system. I'm going to the manufacturer of the drug, and I'm saying, I'm going to buy your drug for $10. Is that cool with you? You know, I know that you generally charge $12, but I'm going to sell a lot of this for you. How does $10 sound? And you say, great. $10 is fine, right? I'm going to take that drug and I'm going to turn around and I'm going to sell it to Johnny over here for $100 through United Health Group, United Healthcare. And the $90, I'm going to put that in my pocket. How does that sound? That's what's going on. A PBM is nothing more than a middleman. They're negotiating and buying drugs from manufacturers. They're selling it, and they're capturing the spread or the difference. That's one of over 30 different profit centers that a PBM has in their arsenal, all at the expense of the organization and the patients, the internal clients.
And when you think about this, this spread revenue, right? I buy low, I sell high. What kind of savings are in there? Because I remember when, learning about this, right? You're like, how much can an amoxicillin, be sold more, and what kind of value is this? Like when you start breaking this down in this RX game, like what kind of savings are we talking about here?
Enormous. So I'll give you a real world example. So we had a client, a prospect actually come to us through marketing, and we had a conversation, and naturally they were skeptical. They were with a fully insured plan. They were on Long Island in New York. We're based in New York City. We cast the national footprint, so we do business throughout the country. But this particular client was on Long Island, and they manufactured hospital disposables, gowns, sterile tools, etc., all for hospitals. And so they were faced with like a 30 to a 35% increase. They were in a fully insured plan. They probably have somewhere in the ballpark of 200 to 300 employees, but the participation in the plan was very low because they're low wage jobs. It's what the employer is doing the best that they can, and so what's generous for this employer, unfortunately, is just not affordable for employees. And there are so many organizations out there that are in that boat. They were doing the best they can, basically. So they came to us and we looked at self-funding, and we actually went down the road of self-funding. We had a bunch of declines, and then we got them underwritten. And so essentially they were happy, they were excited. They weren't going to pay a 30+% increase. As you know, in a first year, an immature contract, it wasn't much different, but the idea and the hope is that we could manage the plan and the expenses well and get them on the path to savings. So I wish I could tell you that this is, a happy ending with rainbow and unicorns, but What happened with this group, Lester, is before I get there, we had one employee in this group that was on Humira. And Humira, as you know, is a very costly drug. It can exceed 6 figures in a year, right? And so if you're in a fully insured plan, let's say you're with United and Optum is the PBM, you really have no choice but to, go with what Optum does and pay full price, pay full retail price, in which case you're paying a lot of money. Well, there are programs out there called PAP, the federal programs, patient assistance plans, that basically, if an employee qualifies, and often even fairly high income employees can qualify because the costs of the drugs are so ridiculously high, then the plan gets the drug for free and the patient gets the drug for free. And so that's one example of a 6-figure drug, one person, one participant, 6-figure drug eliminated. And it's possible when you're self-funded and you're working with a fiduciary PBM, a PBM which names the employer organization as the party that they have fiduciary responsibility to. And so in this instance, we had such a PBM and we were able to get this pushed through at a savings of the plan of 6 figures. Now, but wait, there's more. So we come for renewal with this same group, and this is the worst, most horrific experience rating I've ever seen in my life. You've been around, so maybe you've seen or heard worse. But we had low participation, so let's say we have 20 to 25 employees on plan. A third of them are battling autoimmune diseases, HIV, cancer. It was a complete train wreck. So we go out and look, it's our job. I said in the beginning, we discussed this in the beginning, like authenticity is my word. I want people to understand that there's no magic wand here. I can't guarantee anything, but I'm pretty good at what I do. I'm going to set you on the road to savings. And if we're thrown a curveball, we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to react to it. In this case, we were thrown a curveball, right? You can't help it if the wheels come off and you have a group that just gets crushed in claims. Whether you're self-funded, whether you're fully insured, either way, those are just payment mechanisms. You got to brace for impact because it's coming. Impact is your word, right? So here we go. So we get a bunch of declines. Carriers don't want any part of the business. They're declining to quote. We get one carrier that actually quotes. It's Anthem. And let me just ask you, what's the most egregious family premium annually that you've ever seen on a renewal?
Annually, I'm going to go, I don't know, something like a $2,500 family rate. So doing math, what is that, 30 grand a year?
Yeah, 30 grand. So in the New York City market, family rates, you could find plans on the exchange in the $60,000 to $75,000 ballpark, right? On the exchange. This group came back with $164,000+ for a single family rate. So in other words, Lester, Anthem was saying, we don't want your business.
Right. If you're willing to pay us this, we'll take it.
Correct. So, the point of the story was to say this is the same group that we were able to offload a 6-figure drug on, but even in doing that, the claims were so egregious that there was just no hope for them. So what did we do? Well, we put our thinking caps on and we went back to our partners and we said, we need to roll up our sleeves and do the best that we can for this group. And we did. And what we came up with in their case was an ICRA. And the ICRA strategy worked phenomenally well. And what it's doing for the group is it's actually gotten them from an egregious increase to a decrease off of what they were paying. And on a go-forward basis, because of the nature of an ICRA, they're not in the insurance business anymore. So we were able to really pull a rabbit out of a hat and do something positive for the group, positive for the employees, and it was a win-win. An example of, I'm not patting myself on the back saying that, wow, we were able to manage the costs so well that they're on a glide path to future decreases. And, through our partnerships and what we know and our knowledge and being experts at managing the supply chain of healthcare, we often will drop costs 40 to 60%, as outlandish as that may sound, in the first year or two. And then, consistently maybe see some more decreases until a place where it eventually levels off. We were not able to do that magic here because we had a very, very, very sick population. And so in those situations, we're going to pivot. We're going to do the best that we can. And, fortunately, we were able to do something nice in this case.
Awesome. Again, it goes back to having the multiple tools in the toolbox where, let's just face it, everybody has the same tools. It's not like you and I have found, people that hide under a rock and we looked under the rock. It's more, as the advisor, the willingness to step out on that branch. And quite honestly, in that scenario, it's also the willingness to go back to the client and say, we took a left. We thought we were getting to grandma's house, taking a left. We got to take a right now because there's a detour and we didn't know it. And I find so often that this business is scared to have the tough, the hard, the conversation, or the, hey, based on what I knew last year, that was a good decision. This is a whole nother year and we got a different decision we got to make it. And so I appreciate that level of authenticity, but I think it's also the ability, the humility to be able to say, we're doing the best we can with the data and the information that we have at this very moment. Healthcare is healthcare. It might change tomorrow.
And that's exactly right. And that's what happened. And fortunately, every group is going to be different. Fortunately, this group, I invested enough time with them. They felt the authenticity. They knew that there was just only so much that I could do. And look, as much as they like me, I encouraged them to go back to their former broker and say, hey, if they could do better, then please, by all means, let them go right ahead. And their former broker was like, unfortunately, in this case, there's nothing you could do. And they didn't, by the way, even mention an ICRA as a strategy. And so it made me feel good to know that spending, time in, hotel ballrooms, which is not my favorite place to be, in meetings, listening to industry experts ad nauseum, it really paid off because I had an arrow in my quiver, which was the ICRA that turned out to save this case for this client. And Lester, let me tell you, this is a small group, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but do I do this for revenue and money and to grow my business? Absolutely. I'm a capitalist through and through. Is losing a group like this going to make a difference in my life? Absolutely not. But what's important to me is I want to be a man of my word. I like to think I'm a man of my word. I want to be able to look my client in the eye and say, look, this is the best that we can do in this case. And fortunately, I had the relationship and the time investment with this group. They trusted me. They believed in me. And together we were able to come to a good outcome.
So I want to move because I'm going to assume that you agree with me, and we didn't script this. So if you don't, just maybe pretend you do. The reason more employers don't do the things that you talk about on a daily basis and then I talk about on a daily basis is education, is exposure to it. They just have never heard it before. And we're going to transition into, you and I are two producers on a documentary One, I'd love for you to, for your audience, what is that documentary, and what was so important for you in being a part of it?
Yeah, the documentary, I wasn't, when you go to many conferences, there's always a proposal, a pitch, and there was one here, but it didn't come from the usual suspects. The guy running the conference. It came, and we know who we're talking about. We know him, we love him.
Yeah.
But this pitch came from the producer, the executive producer of the documentary, and it had been in the back of my mind for some time. I like documentaries. Like is probably not a strong enough word. I love documentaries. I love films. I love movies. I'm a Netflix addict. I watch way too much TV. And I said to myself, there really ought to be a documentary about what's going on in the healthcare space. And there have been, a few that kind of touch on patient experiences, but nothing with the behind the scenes stuff that you and I are privy to. And so when Bart Camerata came to the stage and talked about It's Not Personal, It's Just Healthcare, which is the name of the documentary, I was blown away by the quality and the production values and the story and the message. And it didn't take me long to figure out that I wanted to be a part of it. I immediately scanned the QR code and said, I'm in. Because more people, if you and I are being authentic and true to ourselves, and it's not just about the money, we're only going to be on this spinning blue ball for so much longer. What's our legacy going to be? And I, for one, want to make a difference. And people, our fellow Americans out there are working harder in their jobs for less compensation, largely as a result of the inefficiencies of the healthcare system. And it's the entities and the organizations that are benefiting on the backs of our fellow Americans. And so the documentary for me is really about putting, using it as a sounding board, as a megaphone to let people know, don't buy into healthcare's big lie that you can't do anything about the cost of healthcare, because it's fucking bullshit. It just is. You can do something about the cost of healthcare. As an employer, in my opinion, you have an obligation to do so. You forget about my opinion. If you're a self-funded employer, either way, if you have more than 100 employees, ERISA mandates that you spend plan dollars wisely. So whether you know it or not, you have a legal obligation. But forget legal schmiegel. You have an ethical obligation to spend plan dollars wisely. That's important for your organization's bottom line. But the flip of that, and here's the secret sauce: when you spend your dollars wisely, the healthcare outcomes are actually going to increase, because now you're taking an active role in managing healthcare. And when you do that, I promise you, everything just gets better.
What is if you gave the cliff notes and or the elevator pitch to a executive that's listening to this podcast, and we want them to go click over, we'll include it in the show notes, a link to be able to watch it. Why should I spend an hour and 15 minutes watching that documentary?
If healthcare is one of your largest SG&A expenses after payroll, and I'm sure it most likely is, it's an hour and 15 minutes well spent. And the objective should be to view it with skepticism. Don't go into it thinking, oh, this is, going to be the answer to all my prayers. Not necessarily. But if you go into it with an open mind and you say, I want to learn a little bit more about this, it is important to me as a business leader because it is one of my largest expenses, you might walk away with some info that changes your mind, or at least, makes you more receptive to hearing things that don't come from your broker. It amazes me. I think you might have been there for one of our meetings where I think it was Marshberry came in, and, they're like an analytical firm, and they talked about the statistics of how long people stay with their broker. And their broker could deliver consistently bad news, meaning rate increases year over year over year, and on average, so essentially do a bad job. And on average, the tenure is not south of 6 years. And so what I would say to an employer is, isn't it worth looking under the hood and, just kind of seeing what else is out there, hearing one or two or three other opinions with an expense that's one of your largest expenses? I think it makes sense.
I always draw this for folks and say, okay, this is the trend line of healthcare. If we turn this upside down and we said, if your financial advisor lost you money consistently over this many years, would you keep your financial advisor? And nobody in a sane mind says yes. But this is what happens in our industry has produced since the 1960s in regards to healthcare. I'm going to give you my 2 cents on the documentary from the flip side. Coming from a family who had to file bankruptcy because of medical expenses, I'll say, hey, it's great to have employer savings and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to give it on the other end. And you said people are working harder for less. The reality of it is the number of people that are just one normal life thing that occurs away from a financial train wreck is staggering. And typically as advisors in the corner office, $1,000 to you might not trick anything, but $1,000, and you and I see it every day, of people who are pill splitting, who are taking the vial of insulin and pouring it in half and doing all things because they're having to make a real life decision between making a mortgage payment or buying a kid a Christmas present or taking their medication. It is absurd. And I am somebody who have lived it. So from my angle of it, I think that the documentary is altruistic in nature, that like the reality of it is we could do so much good if people just had an open mind to a different way, which is how we've done every other purchase in our life. We buy houses and phones and cars differently than we did 10 years ago, but healthcare, we're still doing the same old shit. It just doesn't make sense. Ray, I want to leave it with you plugging your own podcast, Broken Healthcare. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we launched Broken Healthcare earlier this year. We hit new and noteworthy, which is the equivalent of a New York Times bestseller within 3 weeks of launching. So we're off to a great start. And the concept is really, it's our megaphone. It's our voice going out to not just brokers, not just vendors, not just carriers, but to regular people, regular folks like you and I that are out there every day giving it their all, that, have their own stories to tell. It's about people that have a medical crisis. Maybe they go into the emergency room and, one thing leads to another, and that leads to a procedure and a botched procedure. And, there are medical nightmares out there where people are really run through the ringer. Their surgeries are botched. They get readmitted. It gets botched the second time. And you touched on it, briefly with people pill cutting, and, people just don't have the money to deal with the healthcare system in the U.S. So Broken Healthcare, it really is not just about brokers, advisors, different cost containment strategies. It's all of that, but it's also about having conversations with health practitioners. We had Dr. Jack Wolfson on. He's America's #1 natural heart doctor. So here's a guy who's out there talking about not just, pushing Lipitor. In fact, he's anti-pushing Lipitor. You know what his answer is to lower cholesterol? Go out in the sunlight. Just walk out in the sunshine. You get incredible vitamin D, and it has cholesterol lowering effects. So the idea and the concept is we want to talk about health of oneself, health of one's body, and we just really want to make the world a better place. That's our platform. I'm going to get off my soapbox and say thank you for giving me the opportunity to promote it, but we'd love to have you tune in, download the podcast. We have a YouTube channel that we just started up. So yeah, we're having fun with it.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the word authenticity. I just know that although it seems like there's only a couple of us banging the drum, I feel the momentum, like the conversations we were having 7 years ago when we started this business versus now. 7 years ago, people are like, WTF, and now on a call earlier today, I had CEO, CFO, chairman of the board, HR. I mean, this is such a big deal on both sides. So I just appreciate you banging that drum from where you are. And we all need to just bang the drum together, and we'll make a movement here.
Right on, Lester. Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Take care.
Take it easy.
You've been listening to Impact Healthcare, people and strategies that are disrupting the health benefits industry with Lester Morales. Remember, the journey to getting 20% savings on your healthcare benefits starts with total transparency. Remember to subscribe to the Impact Healthcare podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.